Why, hello, and welcome to this very special interview that we have for you here at Book Lovers TV. So pleased that you have decided to join us today. I am really, really excited to be interviewing my friend, colleague, and fellow author, Dr. Chuck Page. Dr. Page, let me bring you on here and say hello. There he is. There's the man of the hour.
Hey, Daniel.
Hello, sir. So I know that you and I have been kind of chatting off air here for a few minutes, and let's start people with the title of your book, the book that we're here to talk about here today.
Right. So the title of this book is A Spoonful of Courage for the Sick and Suffering. And it's interesting, when everybody hears that, they automatically think of a spoonful of sugar. But, suffering, we're not trying to sugarcoat suffering here. Suffering is real for those who are going through it, especially for people who are going through maybe cancer or, even the COVID crisis now that we're going through. So suffering is real. And that's kind of one of the first things that we want to get through to people is that, sometimes there are things that we don't necessarily get over, but we have to get through them. And that's what the goal of this book is, to help people kind of make the next steps to get through their health challenges.
Yeah, the one thing that's really, really interesting to me, and I want folks to understand, is that you are a practicing surgeon. You're an MD surgeon with many, many years of healing under your belt. And as I read the book, what struck me is just how touching your approach to other people's suffering, and not just their suffering, but by and through the book, this and the messages in the book, this really driving force to help alleviate suffering. Right. That's the one thing that that really struck me about this book as I read it. And so let me just ask you, this is sort of a compendium of stories, right?
It's a compilation of real stories about real people.
Yeah. And that's just it. The really cool thing is that each story seems to embody different ways to cope with pain, with physical trauma, with mental trauma.
Yep.
So tell me, what inspired you to write this book, this kind of a book, especially?
Well, so let me answer that in two ways. First of all, there was an experience that I had that kind of motivated me, but also in retrospect, I realized that one of the reasons I was writing this book is it was a way for me to process these events. Even as a healthcare worker, we have these things that happen that, it's just hard to wrap our mind around. And so this was one of the ways, journaling, we're learning about the benefits of journaling now with a lot of kind of a growing amount of literature, but we're realizing the importance of journaling. And this is kind of one of the ways that I've kind of helped to process this. But really, I kind of think the thing that really pushed me forward in these stories is I had my own kind of my own situation, my own adversity that kind of really showed me the significance of stories. So about 3 years ago, my office building burned down. And to be honest, I was underinsured, and I put a lot of my retirement into that building. And as I watched it go up in flames, it seems like all my dreams were gone. And so it's interesting, in that building, there were 4 things that I found in the stairwell that kind of helped me to rebuild my life. And not to go into those too much, but one of those was a Bible that it had a lot of soot, but had not been burned completely. And that was one thing. Another thing was an old black doctor's bag. And kind of reminded me that even though my building had burned down, I still had a profession. I still had an opportunity to encourage people and to, like you said, heal people. Third thing was a picture of my kids up in the kind of where the stairwell turned, and kind of realized there's still people in my life that I can influence. And then my wife had built this cross up at the top, and the fire had singed through the cross. It looked hideous, and the wall looked hideous. It was this beautiful stained wall. But when I took off the cross, there was this impression of the cross on the wall, and I realized, sometimes things happen in our lives that we just can't explain, at least on this side of heaven. And but yet, in those times of adversity, God begins to imprint His life in us if we'll just allow Him to do so. So, but anyway, what really motivated me, Daniel, is that as I began to, I was still on call that weekend, and as I began to, go through rounds and talk to people, I mean, it was on the news and everything, and people began to tell me their stories. And as I began to hear people's stories, I began to realize several things. Number one, I don't have it as bad as they did. And number two, it could always be worse. But also, I just realized the power that a story has. I mean, a lot of friends, from church or wherever, they would give me the Bible verse and the encouragement and the pat on the back. But when I heard these stories, for example, one man who was in the hospital, he said, "Doc, you're not going to believe this, but my house burned down as well. And my invalid wife was in the house and I couldn't get her out."
Wow.
And so that man had to watch his house burn down with his wife inside. I mean, can you imagine the pain of that? And I was kind of throwing a pity party at the time, Daniel. And as I began to hear that story, I began to realize, man, I have nothing to complain about. And just over and over again, I began to hear these stories of people, and I realized that the thing that really kind of helped me to take the next step and begin to move forward in my crisis, it wasn't necessarily a health crisis, but my personal crisis was the stories of other people and just how powerful those are. And so as I began to think of that, I began to compile these stories and realize that they're just ordinary people every day that just have these stories that need to be told. Of course, we've changed the names and changed the scenarios a little bit for confidentiality purposes, but it's really significant that that they have something to tell. And these are the heroes of the book. I'm not necessarily the hero. I'm just conveying their stories to other people about how they moved forward.
Yeah, I mean, I shared with you before we went on air here that I don't usually cry reading books, but there are several stories in this book where I found, I'm tearing up and I'm like, wow, I'm an old softie. And the one that really, the one that really touched me, I believe it's called Angel Kisses, about Claire and the grandma with this condition with the warts and all. To relay that story because I just love the message of unconditional love. Right. That story relayed to me, and a big part of that plays into that particular story is it's coming from this display of unconditional love is coming from a 3-year-old, and to tell folks about that, about basically being able to look at life through the lens of a 3-year-old or a child.
Right. So anyway, that's a story about a patient of mine who had von Recklinghausen's disease, and it's a rare neurologic deficit. And they have these little skin-like tentacles that are all over their body, and so and it's pretty grotesque in some ways, to have these kind of little things dangling off your face and your body, and of course, it's one of those things that's kind of an eye turner, So this lady had lived her whole life with von Recklinghausen disease. She came in with her granddaughter, and her granddaughter was, eating a lollipop and getting, lollipop juice everywhere. And she looked at me and she said, "Doctor, I need you to take off these. I need you to take off these tentacles." And I'm like, "You got to be kidding! I'd have to do skin transplant to take all these off, And she said, "No, you don't understand. I've got these on my back that, are kind of rubbing and they're bleeding, and I just need those, those 2 lesions taken off." And so, which was something that's feasible to do. And all along her granddaughter, I believe her name was Claire, and she's sitting there loving on her grandmother. And her grandmother began to tell me her story about her life. Growing up, of course, there were so many misconceptions about her disease process. It was so rare. And she remembered that when she was a little girl, other kids' parents would kind of take their kids and pull them away and say, "Hey, stay away from her. You might get what she's got." You talk about like frogs. You touch a frog and you get warts. And so all of these misconceptions about her disease, and she was really in a sense, kind of an outcast for her whole life. And you can imagine the emotional trauma that she was dealing with. And initially, I got really angry. I got really mad that people responded that way, to her health issues. But then little Claire kind of sat up in her mom's lap, and she says, I love these. I love mom's little fleshy things. They're angel kisses. And I realized that patient had received more than many people have ever received in their life. I mean, she received unconditional love. And man, if we could just have that kind of childlike look towards other people, even thinking about what's going on with our nation right now, and all the controversies and things we're dealing with, if we could just really begin to see people through a different set of lenses as people, and that's kind of the whole point of Christ, is that Christ didn't see people as conservative or liberal. He didn't see them as races. He didn't see them as rich or poor or religious or non-religious people. He just saw people as they were, and I think that's something that we can learn from a little child.
Without a doubt. I mean, and that I read that and I'm like, oh, like tears coming down.
Yeah, me too.
Like, yes, this story was just so moving and touching, and not only that, I mean that's just basically the tip of the iceberg with this book, because as I went through it, there was story after moving and touching story, and I had to wonder, did you, like, when these stories were happening to you, did you like consciously say, oh, this is something I could use later, or did you just sort of think about it retrospectively and say, oh yeah, this thing that I experienced, I think has this message, or we could use it to communicate this message? How was that?
Well, yeah, some were in retrospective years later that I really began to, like I said, a lot of this is just processing things that kind of went on in my life. I would like to quit my day job, Daniel, but I can't because I get good stories. These things that you encounter every day, and there's things that you can learn from people if we'll just stop and listen. And I think that's one of the things I've learned over the years as I've kind of matured, is I've learned to listen to people and listen to their stories. And you learn a lot from people when you listen. So
so true. And it is a lost art, to be sure. I think of all the stories that I read in the book, Angel Kisses was my favorite. But I wanted to ask you, what was your favorite story?
There's a story that kind of hits home to me. So I'm a surgeon. I like to fix things. And my mother, probably 4 or 5 years ago, died of lung cancer. She was healthy as a horse. She had that rare kind of cancer that faked out all the doctors, had all the tests, and the tests were negative. And so ultimately it was diagnosed late as a bronchoalveolar cancer. And my mother was going through this process of chemotherapy, and we knew she was going to die. And here it is, I was, those feelings of being out of control and unable to change things. Here it is, I could save people's lives, but I really couldn't do anything for my own mother. And I'm watching her shrivel away. And along comes this patient named Catherine. Now, Catherine lived way out in the woods, and she would walk down by the river, one of the rivers here in Texas, and she would pick pecans. And of course, if you're from Texas, you gotta love pecans.
But of course.
Anyway, so Catherine came to the emergency room one day with a locally advanced breast cancer, and it was eroding through her skin, and her kids had just found out about it, and they thought it was an emergency. They took her to the emergency room, and Catherine knew she had this for a long time, and Catherine knew that she was going to die. I mean, she knew that her time had come, and so she just really didn't. She just really didn't do much with it. Initially, I thought she was kind of being neglectful, and patients can, show neglect. But as I got to know Catherine through the process, I realized it wasn't the fact that she was really in neglect or in denial of her condition. She really just didn't think about herself that much. She was always thinking and focusing on other people. And so Catherine found out that my mother had cancer. And here was a lady about the same age as my mother. And we would come into the office, maybe after surgery or chemotherapy or whatever, and she would say, "How's your mom?" It's so funny. She would begin to kind of move the conversation away from herself and towards my mom. And really, it's kind of funny, I'm the doctor. I'm supposed to be the one telling, imparting things to people. But the reverse happened, where she was encouraging me. And so she would bring in these little sacks of pecans. And I didn't really catch on to it at first, but after several visits, I realized that when she was down there by the river picking those pecans, she was praying for people. And that was kind of a symbol, in a sense, of a fact that she was giving me something, helping me to realize that she had been praying for me and my mother in this process. And here's a person dying of cancer, and her focus is really not on herself. And I don't know, Daniel, whenever I go through things, whenever I go through stuff, I'm always focused inward. I'm always thinking about, I feel alone, I feel afraid, all of these emotions. And it was just so refreshing to see someone who really wasn't worried about herself. I mean, I know she had those concerns, but, her concern was she was looking upward, and then she began to look outward and looking at people that she could encourage, that she could, kind of help along the way, and I think that's one of the things that we often forget, Daniel, is that, our adversity, whatever our problems is, it may not be a health problems, but, our adversity, our problems are opportunities to influence other people. And so often when when life is great and everything, it seems like people don't listen to us, just like my kids, we can tell them something and it just goes in one ear and out the other, and so, but when we're going through a health crisis or some kind of adversity or some kind of challenge, it's almost like we turn the volume up and people listen in our pain to us. So it's an opportunity. And Catherine was using that opportunity to influence me and encourage me to keep going. And I'll be forever indebted to her for that.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And there's yet another one of the stories, as I went through the book and I was thinking, fortunately I'm in good health, my family's in good health. And it really helped me to be more grateful for that. And that's always a good thing. I think you would probably agree, right, Dr. Page?
Absolutely.
To be more grateful for the things that we have, and that's yet another thing that I learned from the book. You relate the story of a child that you see in the ER that basically, playing with his sister or brothers and sisters, he hung himself, right? And can you kind of finish the rest of that story and kind of, because that was another one of the ones that I read that and I'm like, oh,
and that's something that still lingers in my mind. In fact, looking at the other side of this, we have these things that happen in our lives that just, I mean, that just shake us, that just these moments that are just imprinted in our mind. And I was talking to a police officer about 6 months ago, and he didn't know anything about the story. And he began to relate the same incident from his perspective of things. And little did I know that it was the same person. And, he had the same thing, just in a different way. He was the police officer that came there to the scene and brought her in, who I didn't even know he was there. But anyway, this was just some kids, just playing. They were playing Cowboys and Indians in an apartment. And I think the little brother lassoed her around the neck, and she slipped, and the rope got caught, and she hung herself there in the stairs. And it was a pretty horrific moment, as you can imagine. I mean, even the police officer had that. And, we brought her in, and she was brain dead, and they had, sometimes I think as healthcare workers, we try to do things, we want to, our conscious or whatever, we kind of overdo things, sometimes to either treat the family or treat ourselves even sometimes. But, she was dead when she got to the emergency room. She was dead on arrival. And, the nurses want us to keep going. And I'm like, guys, we don't want to go there. Let's let her go. Let's call the code. And some of the nurses, kind of nudged me, kind of pushed me into giving her some medicines. And we did. We gave her some medicines, and we got her heart back, and we got everything back. And she ended up being brain dead. And you can imagine just the grief of having to go in to share that with the family, that this young, healthy kid that, 2 hours ago was full of life was now brain dead. And how do you wrap your mind around that as a family member? And so it was not easy. And I remember the chaplain coming in. We have a great chaplain. Unfortunately, I only see him when something's really bad. So when I see the chaplain, we kind of joke about that, but the chaplain came in and he encouraged him and he prayed for him. He says, I know that something's good's going to come out of that. And, ultimately we're able to take that kid and send that kid off for organ donation. And, her lungs went to help another young kid who had a congenital lung problem, and same with her kidneys. And, all of her organs, her heart was able to be transplanted into another kid with a congenital heart deformity. So there was good that came out of that painful process. It doesn't, like I said, this is not a spoonful of sugar. This is a spoonful of courage. And it's just hard to wrap my mind around maybe a family who has had a child who's committed suicide or whatever, it just, but sometimes we need to change the lenses of how we look through things. That's not sweeping pain under the rug. I mean, pain is real, Daniel, and it takes, there's some things that we never get over. We just have to get through them. And sometimes I think families, knowing that there was some good that came out of it, I think it gives them a sense maybe of being able to, of closure and being able to kind of move forward, even in the midst of their pain.
Yeah, when I think I counted 4 or 5 other lives saved as a result of those heroic efforts that you put in on that little girl, to at least save her enough to keep her organs alive,
Yep.
and viable for other people that really needed them as well. And that kind of brings me to, I've heard you call yourself on a couple of occasions, the best guy to see on the worst day of your life. What do you mean by that? I mean, I think I know, but
yeah. Well, Daniel, I'm the guy you never want to see. You definitely
don't want to see you.
No one's ever excited to see me. In fact, about 6 months ago, I think it was maybe Christmas time, I walked into a room and I saw this patient, and he just was smiling from ear to ear, and he just looked so happy. He says, "Doctor, I hadn't seen you in 10 years." And it kind of hurt my feelings, and I said, well, that's not fair. I mean, 10 years. And he said, well, the last time I saw you, you chopped my leg off. So anyway, I'm kind of that guy. I'm the guy that you never really want to see, but when you need me, hopefully me or someone like me is there to help you.
Yeah, I mean, I so get it, especially after going through the book. That there is that element for sure in what you do and what you bring to the table. As a matter of fact, one of the things that struck me about the book, not just about the book, it's actually what struck me about you, because uh, the approach, um, the compassionate, tender-hearted way that you approach your patients, and the respect that you give to the stories. I thought, oh my God, Dr. Page he's like the consummate healer. He is a healer of body, mind, and spirit, and that's what came through so much to me personally, when I went through this book. So I really thank you for writing the book, by the way. I will just say, for those people watching this, that if you have or have had a trauma in your life, that you still suffer from, that this is one of those books that I believe for many people can be transformative. It can. I think the way that you relate other people's stories that basically turn something pretty bad into, in many cases, miraculously good. And that's again, that can I think it can transform people. As a matter of fact, one of the things I would like to do with your permission, I would like to play the trailer that we have for A Spoonful of Courage. Would that be all right with you?
That'd be great.
All right, let me go ahead and do that so people can really see what we're talking about here.
Hi, I'm Dr. Page, the best guy to see on the worst day of your life. If you're going through a health challenge, there's one thing I know. It's often not the diagnosis or the affliction which is the hardest part of going through a health challenge. It's discouragement. So often our health challenges make us feel alone, we feel afraid, we feel anxious, we feel out of control, we feel inadequate to face the challenges that are before us. And so I would like to introduce you to A Spoonful of Courage for the sick and suffering. These are real stories about real people who have learned to see the opportunities that their health challenges provide for them, help to see the possibilities in their problems. After being a surgeon for 25 years, one thing I've realized is that faith makes a huge impact in a person going through any type of health challenge, whether it's a chronic disease, whether it's cancer, whether it's an acute problem, whether it's the COVID-19 virus. Spoonful of Courage for the Sick and Suffering shares inspiring stories about ordinary people responding in extraordinary ways to their health challenges. These doses of encouragement help the sick change focus, embrace adversity, and move forward. These little spoonfuls, you'll hear stories about the lifelong friend who showed up when nobody else would, the man who literally gave the hat on top of his head to encourage his doctor, the girl with no hands who learned to twirl a spoon and feed herself, the surprised old lady who pulled off a nurse's wig,
The old rancher who shocked his heart into rhythm every morning with an electric fence wire. The granddaughter's courage to touch grandma's skin tentacles. The woman dying of breast cancer who picked pecans and prayed for people by the river. These stories of faith, hope, and courage will motivate you to keep going. And so often, when we begin to not look inward, but then first begin to look upward and look at what God's promises say in our health crisis, we often begin to see things through a different set of lenses. And so often, that helps us begin to be able to look outward and see other people and find other people that we can influence, that we can encourage, and then we can help along the way. I'm Dr. Page, the best guy to see on the worst day of your life.
Awesome. I love it. So one of the other things that I note there at the very end of the of your trailer is do you have ways for people to reach out and connect with you and to you? And I actually checked them out. They're available here. So you have 4 free gifts that you give away to people that will go just point their camera phone right there at your phone camera. There's a bot that will kind of ask you a couple questions and then you can get these 4 great gifts. And that's the other thing I'd like to do is you do a little video of what those 4 free gifts are, and I'd like to share that with the Book Lovers TV community as well. So let's do that right now.
I'm Dr. Page, the best guy to see on the worst day of your life, and thanks for being here. I just want to offer you 4 possibilities of free gifts that you can take home with you, depending upon your needs. The first free gift is just a downloadable PDF where you can print it out and give a gift, maybe to a friend or a loved one who's sick. And these are just encouraging stories to give them. The second, of course, is our free ebook, which you can download as well. The third thing is a little bit longer. This is a prayer journal, which is online, which is linked with about 10 YouTube videos that you'll get, and it's called the Surviving Sickness and Suffering Toolkit. It just goes with some of the things that we face and helps you kind of write down and process all of those things that are happening in your life, giving you some spiritual truths that'll guide you. And so that's a little bit longer free gift there. And the fourth thing is just our sleep videos. We've got 4 of those for you that will encourage you if you're having sleep problems. Don't know what your needs are, so that's why I'm giving you all these different options as far as what you need. Thanks for being here. You'll also get the option to share these with your friends. Feel free to give these to links to whoever. Thanks for your time. I'm Dr. Page.
Awesome. So there's where you go right there. Just point your phone camera right like that and kind of answer. There's a couple little questions. Dr. Page wants to know your name and, of course, which gift you want and your email address so he could send it to you. But that's where you would go to get that. So, Dr. Page, I've really enjoyed having this chat with you today. But one of the things I do want to kind of looking forward, I do want to ask you about some of your other activities, because I know that you are a surgeon. You're a physician, but you're a physician on all these levels: physical, emotional, spiritual.
I'm on call today, Daniel.
that's a rarity.
So where am I going? I really don't know. I mean, I'm trying to quit my day job, but it's not going real well. So, the next book we're working on is a book called. It's kind of a follow up to Spoonful of Courage for the Sick and Suffering. is for caregivers. So often caregivers are the forgotten sufferers in a health crisis. And, Daniel, I've seen this in the COVID pandemic. I mean, because everybody's so disconnected when they come to the hospital, and I'm having to have conversations with caregivers and family members in the parking lot of the hospital, and it's just the most, unnerving kind of situation. And so the caregivers are people who really need to be encouraged too. And they suffer in a different way than the people who have the sickness. Most of the focus is on, sick people, and so the caregivers are often forgotten, and they have a whole different set of challenges that they have to go through. So hopefully that'll be coming out next year. I'm also working on a book called The Life Equation. It's a book that kind of takes spiritual principles and puts them in a mathematical equation. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not a math geek. But it kind of helps us to understand how we think and how we process our life circumstances in kind of mathematical terms. Interesting.
And I don't know if you know this, but both my wife and I are nurses. Although neither one of us practice, I certainly can relate to this idea of caring for the caregivers, and because they need it, they need help. They absolutely need help, just like you as a caregiver need help, and all the physicians that are doing. I don't profess for any particular one religion, but I do think that you and I are and others in this community that we are the hands and the mind of God, and or whatever, the great spirit in the sky, however you want to, but by our works, by what we do, by how we relate to one another, how we help one another, that really shines through in this book. And once again, I want to thank you so much for writing it, because as I said, it's a very moving book, and I know that it's a very healing book for the people that really need that kind of healing. It's in there. I mean, you've basically distilled down the words and the stories and cooked up this great prescription, this great remedy.
Well, thank you.
All right here in this book. So thank you
so
for that.
much. Yeah. So, it's also been good for me. I think another group of people are healthcare providers, who needs to read this book. Of course, people who are going through a health crisis, also their caregivers, but also doctors, nurses, like you're talking about, physical therapists, people who also, care for people in a different way. I mean, we also go through emotional, spiritual trauma as we go through these things, and just kind of going back to getting a perspective. That's what I hope this book does, helps us change focus. There's a saying, show me your focus and I'll show you your future. And so getting the focus off so much of our feelings, not that our feelings aren't important, but going back to some facts, and, from a Christian worldview, we believe that, the scriptures are, God's, how God communicates with us. And so going back and looking at the facts, and then having faith, and then letting our feelings follow that, I think really helps us to be able to process these events, these life events that we go through.
Absolutely. And by the way, where can folks grab a Spoonful of Courage? Where could they get that book?
Well, any bookstore, of course. Now with the COVID crisis, it's hard to find a bookstore that's open. But any independent bookstore, Barnes and Nobles, you can find it, of course, on Amazon. Pretty much the typical venues that you can find them on. You can also find them at our website, charleswpage.com, and I think we have some specials there for you as well. So there's a lot of different ways you can get a hold of the book.
Awesome. And once again, I want to share and encourage folks to head on over to to this little QR code that we have for you. Just go ahead and point your phone camera at it. You don't have to know about QR codes or scanning or anything. Your phone will know what to do, and it will pop right over to Dr. Page's site, and you can get those free gifts, and of course learn a lot more about A Spoonful of Courage and about Dr. Page's mission, which, as I think we all can agree, is a pretty doggone important one for many folks. So with that, I want to once again thank you so much for appearing here on A Book Lovers TV. If you want a great read, if you want a read that heals, this is the book, A Spoonful of Courage for the Sick and Suffering. And with that, thank you, Dr. Page. Go grab the book right now.